Hey everyone, it's Strange Michael. I hope you're doing well today. Just so you know, my allergies are still messing with me. I'm still wiping at my eyes, still blowing my nose constantly. It's kind of relaxed now, so I think I'm good to record some videos. Anyway, I have a review here for Richard Stanley's 2019 adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft short story, whatever it was, like 50 pages long. I've never read it, as a matter of fact, even though I've read like probably 15 or 20 H.P. Lovecraft stories. I'm not the biggest Lovecraft guy, even though I love Pulp Fiction. Not the movie, but, you know, the genre, the subgenre, whatever. This is his adaptation of Color Out of Space. Now, I have heard a lot about this story. Like I said, I've never seen it, or read it, I mean. And this is the first time I've ever watched it. It's on Shudder. I think Shudder actually made it. It's an hour and 50 minutes long, which I was a little worried about going into it, but it is Richard Stanley. Richard Stanley, once upon a time, was a very well-known director who basically stopped making movies after The Island of Dr. Moreau with Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando kind of... Well, he started working on that and it ruined his career. He went nuts. He just kind of vanished, went into the forest where they were shooting the movie at and stuff, and just kind of disappeared for a little while. You could still see him in the movie, in the background character costumes and stuff. But anyway, Richard Stanley made some other films that a lot of people really love that I haven't seen, called Dust Devil and Hardware. It was a lot of B-movie horror type of stuff. Hardware I've seen clips of, and what I saw looked beautiful. It looked terrifying, though. I'm really scared of, like, AI and artificial intelligence type stuff, animatronics, all of that shit messes with me. It's one of my biggest fears on the entire planet. It's why Terminator gets me so bad. Richard Stanley, even though I'm not very exposed to his work, I know enough about it to say, hey, you know, this guy had some talent. Clearly, at some point he had a lot of talent, and people really tried to invest in him, but then things went horribly wrong because Hollywood, the more you get involved with Hollywood, really kind of sucks the life out of a person and their career. You either become a total monkey in a suit, or you become somebody who can be unique, and then you get ruined, like Spielberg. But he still has some quality. Anyway, Richard Stanley made his first movie in a long time, back in 2019, with this movie, Color Out of Space. And again, I haven't seen it before. This is the first time I've seen it. I had heard a lot of things, of course, the similarities to another Nicolas Cage movie, Mandy, which he's also in here, by the way. A lot of parallels were being drawn between the two. You can watch both on Shudder, as a matter of fact. Personally, I think Mandy is an incredible, perfect movie. I think it's absolutely eerie and just wonderful and horrific and scary and fun and art house-like. Color Out of Space has a touch of the art house, but it's mainly a straightforward, weird movie. Just a straight-out weird movie. Now, I don't know how well I could say that it adapts the Lovecraft story because I haven't read it, but the concept of that story seemed a little bizarre on how you would adapt that to a movie. Because the idea is there's a color out of space, and it's a color human beings have never seen before, which is wild, dude. This is the kind of stuff Lovecraft would come up with. His style of storytelling is really not for me. That's why I didn't rush to read this first before I reviewed this movie, or watched this movie for that matter. I wanted to kind of take the film on its own front and see what it's like. So if you're looking for somebody's opinion on who has read the book, or short story, whatever, go find somebody else. For me, I just like kind of, you know, I love to read, but I like movies as well. And I kind of wanted to just see what this was like. What was it about? And I gotta tell you, I really enjoyed this movie. It's not as good as Mandy, for sure, and I think it's kind of unfair to compare the two, but all of the pink and purple color scheme, the kind of synthwave music we have in here that really makes a beautiful atmosphere for this movie, it's kind of hard not to compare it to Mandy if you're a big Nicolas Cage fan like myself, or a fan of this kind of movie. It's a weird film, like I said. It's technically a science fiction film, but kind of like a fantasy movie mixed in with our reality because of what happens in the movie. Spoiler free, of course, just in case you haven't seen it, but just know ahead of time, I really, really, really recommend this flick if you're the right kind of person, if it sounds interesting to you, especially with that synthwave soundtrack idea. A lot of the time, that will hook somebody immediately. Whether they're a fan of a certain genre or anything, that'll still hook people a lot of the time. If you're looking for that kind of thing, this is for you. If you're a big Richard Stanley fan, this is for you, for sure. Anyway, what is Color Out of Space about? Well, basically, there's a family, and it's Nicolas Cage, his wife, and they have two sons. One of them is the oldest son, and one is the youngest, and they also have a daughter who's kind of the middle child, who is more into like occult ritual stuff, like pagan type stuff. And apparently the mom has recently been diagnosed with a disease, and it's kind of sad. They're all kind of worried about that. And we're watching this young girl struggle in her family to really kind of, worry about her mom. And that's really touching. That's actually very, very much the heart of this movie, right? And the other kids, they're a little worried too. Mainly the older brother because, he's the oldest child. He's been around the longest. He has a lot of worries there too. Nicolas Cage plays such a genuine father. His performance is so good here. Not as good as Mandy, but he's good here for what he had to do of being a dad, being the leader of this family. They live on a farm that used to be like his grandparents' farm or something back in the day. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And he's worried about his wife as well, but he's trying to make the best of the situation. Every actor cast for this movie, except for the youngest son, who, is a kid. What do you expect? He doesn't really have a whole lot of time in the movie for that matter. But everybody else in the film is cast wonderfully. I think everybody gives a really good, solid performance. I think it's really a heartfelt film to also be a sci-fi / horror movie. It's truly eerie. It really, really messed with me as I watched this movie. I think it'll really get under your skin if you're not used to this kind of thing being a weird fiction movie, which really encapsulates that weirdness that a lot of Lovecraft stories typically have. And I'd be curious to see how many things are in that story that were adapted to this. It feels like it wouldn't be a very faithful adaptation, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe I am wrong. Who cares? If Lovecraft did some of the things that were in this movie, I would be shocked, because it was truly, truly horrific. There are things in this film I will never unsee. Now, this family that are at this farm, at some point a meteorite lands near their house, like on the property. And it seems like every day, or every night mainly, something will happen where they have all witnessed something, some kind of color or like a white flash, something like that. I don't want to get into too much about what that is, why it's there. It's very Lovecraft in a lot of cool ways. I'm sure this part of the story is probably pretty faithful to that original story that Lovecraft wrote. I don't know. But I will tell you this. People start to lose their minds in the family. Things start to happen. The family dog goes missing, that kind of thing. Nicolas Cage is slowly starting to lose his mind. Something really, really horrific happens to a couple of family members in the movie that I will never forget. Now let me tell you this, for it being an hour and 50 minutes, there's probably a couple of times you could cut out some moments in the film to really trim down the time of this movie. I don't think it needs to be an hour and 50 minutes. For me personally, I never had a problem with the pacing of the film. I think it moves very smooth. I think it works very well in pretty much every aspect. But I really wasn't engaged and in love with well, I wouldn't even say loving the movie, but I wasn't into the movie until probably an hour into the runtime, which is almost halfway through 2 hours of a movie. And I'll tell you, when I got to that hour point, I was so invested. I mean, there was a lot of heartfeltness up to that point. I had to watch the film over a couple of days. Maybe that had something to do with it. But about halfway through the film is when I got sucked into it and really started to care about what was happening with the family, what was happening in general, the really horrific shit that started to happen that bothered me so much. There's a little bit of body horror in here in a very Richard Stanley way that if you like things like Hardware, and the things I've seen of Hardware, it will be unforgettable for you. I promise you, it's really going to mess with you, man. If you're a squeamish person, this is not for you. No matter how much you like sci-fi, this is not traditional sci-fi. This is something that, again, it's weird fiction, which is what Lovecraft wrote for. Even the magazine he worked for was called Weird Fiction, where they would publish his short stories once upon a time. If you're not used to that kind of thing and what they do in Stanley's movies, you're going to be in for a shock. You're going to be in for a shock. I did not expect the directions we went, because the first half of the film is a good but kind of generic movie. That other half is something you've never really seen before. Really, truly, you haven't seen it really that much before, I would say. Most people haven't seen that before. And maybe it's why the reception of the film seemed like it was a little weird when the film first came out. I remember a lot of people talking about this movie and not really being in love with it. I remember that deeply. And here we are 4 years later. I'll tell you, I've got to say, I really like the movie. I wouldn't buy it for my collection, but I like it enough that I'm like, I would recommend this to the right person. If any of the things I said to you sound interesting to you, especially the character study part of this, you should check it out. It's really, really solid, and it's very well made. There's a lot to say about the film when it comes to like the CGI, which is in here. It's prominent, but it's not there long enough to really focus on that, being good or bad. You know, I would say a lot of it's kind of bad, but some of it can be good. Some of it can be really good. Some of it actually made me kind of I have my jaw hanging open, if you will. There is some practical effects stuff. I think that stuff, when it's there, is very, very effective. Some of the moments in this film remind me a little bit of like John Carpenter's The Thing. There's a little bit of that in this movie, which was really cool. I loved that about it too. The writing of the characters and the acting, like I said, all of that stuff, pretty much fantastic from everybody who's not a very small child in the film. I hate to feel like I'm beating down on that kid, but man, you know, he's a kid. You know, he can't help it. Everybody gives a really, really great performance here, I think. Out of the adults, the oldest brother probably gives the weakest performance, if I had to say. But the writing for everyone here is really well done. It's a tragic story. It's really, again, something that is going to be memorable for a long time. Every time I think about this film, there's one distinct aspect I will never forget. But again, there's other things to it too. It's beautifully shot. Richard Stanley's direction here was fantastic for a guy who hadn't made a movie in forever, decades, dude. Since The Island of Dr. Moreau, I believe, is when he made his last movie, which was like the 90s, like 92, 98, somewhere in there. It was so long ago. For a guy who hasn't made like a big budget movie from an actual studio in forever, this was incredible. This was an incredible comeback. It's a beautiful film, and apparently, supposedly, Richard Stanley had a couple of other H.P. Lovecraft films that are apparently still in the works. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. It's been so long, maybe it won't. But the guy has incredible talent. Richard Stanley, if you ever happen to come across, this review, I want you to know, man, you got a new fan here. This was really, really incredible, man. Everything about it, the directing and all of that, for the kind of budget this movie had, there was so much talent in it that I want to see those other Lovecraft adaptations from Richard Stanley, heavily. I really do. And again, the music, wow. It's very synth-like, but it's not like an 80s pop type of thing. It's actually trying to draw you in very much, again, like the score from The Thing. It's very much something like that I think will grab most audiences and really kind of shake you sometimes. The ending of the film gave me chills because of that music's incorporation in this film. It's beautiful, man. Anyway, the film overall, very weird film. But Color Out of Space, I recommend it. If it sounds appealing to you, you should absolutely 1000% check this out. It was so freaking surprisingly good if you can get to that halfway point of the film. But otherwise, I really enjoyed it a lot. If I had to rate Color Out of Space on a 5-star basis, I'd probably give it a 4 out of 5 stars, man. I loved it so much. I think it has so much beauty to it, which I wasn't expecting for kind of a low-budget sci-fi horror movie that wasn't even that much sci-fi aside from the concept involved of how it was affecting these regular old people living on a farm, you know? Really great flick. I loved it a lot. I really recommend it to you guys if you haven't seen it before. It is a shockingly horrific movie that, even for a film that doesn't have like really any gore or anything, just the stuff that you will witness here, it's gonna mess with you. The body horror aspects, again, really impactful. Anyway, have you seen Color Out of Space, the 2019 adaptation of Lovecraft's work from Richard Stanley? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down in the comment section down below. Thank you all for watching. God bless you all, and goodbye.